Welcome to Straight from the CPA's Mouth, your connection to the Heshie CPA Knowledge Center, Alberta CPAs, and business professionals. This podcast, presented by the CPA Education Foundation, features Alberta Chartered Professional Accountants and others sharing their expertise and insights on a wide range of topics. Tune in regularly for eye-opening looks on leadership, business, education, and many issues of the day, straight from the CPA's mouth. Before we begin, in honor of the 94 calls to action put forth by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, we'd like to acknowledge that CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous peoples and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Welcome back to part 2 of our financial literacy series. My name is Nikay Fabier with the CPA Education Foundation, and I'll be your host for this episode. If you missed part 1 of the series, I am joined by Robin Taub CPA CA, professional speaker and author of the Wisest Investment, teaching your kids to be responsible, independent, and money smart for life, where we discussed financial literacy for children. According to the 2019 Canadian Financial Capability Survey, 49% of Canadians report having a budget. Compared to non-budgeters, Canadians who budget are less likely to fall behind on their financial commitments and are less likely to spend more than their monthly income. As adults, how can we learn to build a budget that considers our financial commitments and milestones while also making room for the things and experiences that we want? Let's hear Robin's thoughts on money management straight from the CPA's mouth. Hello, Robin. Thank you for joining us again.
Good to be back, Nikay. Thank you for having me again.
Awesome. Well, we're talking about the intro. 49% of us have budgets. I want to take a moment to focus on the 51% that I guess don't necessarily consider themselves to be people who are budgeters. So what information do we need to know, and what first steps should we take before building a budget?
As a preface to that, I would say the first thing is just focus on your own situation. Try not to get caught up in comparing your spending or your income to other people or in FOMO. Just, start with gathering the information about your own circumstances. So start with what's coming in. How much money am I making after tax? And that, if you have a job, it's pretty straightforward. If you have your own business or small business or side hustle, maybe a little more complicated to get that information or to forecast it. But to the best of your ability, figure out what's coming in and then what's going out. That's the other side of the equation, are your expenses. So I think one of the best tips you can do is to track your spending for a period of time and to get, a grip on the reality of what you're actually spending your money on, because often people, either they don't know where their money's going or they're surprised to learn where it's actually going. So tracking is a really great reality check and can be a wake-up call and a great reminder, to make really good spending choices. And by that, I mean to try to spend with your values in mind, because you said at the beginning, there's so many things we want to have both today and in the future. Mm-hmm. And how do we prioritize those things? How do we make these trade-offs? So that's where your values come in. And your values are the things in your life that are most important to you, that you hold dear, or that you're willing to take a stand for. And your values can act as an invisible framework to help you guide and prioritize your financial decisions.
That's really great advice. So I wanted to talk a little bit, because you did say to kind of go back and figure out what you're spending your money on. So for those who don't have a budget, I guess, how far back should people be looking? Like a month, 2 months, 3 months?
You could go back, let's say, you want it to be a representative period of time. So, and it has been unusual times these last 18 months. Many of us, especially early in the pandemic, we were not doing a lot of the nice to do and fun to do things. A lot of our discretionary spending wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. So you do want to make sure that it's like representative of what your life is going to look like going forward. So I would say at least 6 months to go back. And then, or if you want to just say, okay, I'm going to start tracking now. As I mentioned in the first episode, if you use these tracking tools that are built into your online banking, they will track your actual spending and they will help you set budgets. So you could sort of say, okay, I'm going to track for the next 3 months and I'm going to use that information to help me set my budget going forward. Or you could look back, let's say at the last 6 months, if they're representative, and use that information as well. But don't forget, there are certain expenses that are annual, perhaps insurance payments in some cases, maybe vacations or gifts that aren't monthly recurring expenses. So you want to make sure you pick everything up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, how do we build a budget that is realistic? I know you said it's important to take into consideration the things that you value. So should we also be building, I guess, a little bit of a fund for those miscellaneous things like birthdays or little gifts here and there?
Definitely. And there's lots of really good online resources, budget templates where you can see the line items in the budgets. All the banks have them, but the Ontario Securities Commission is an unbiased, objective source of those types of tools as well. And so that will also help remind you of things like that you might have forgotten about, like gifts or holidays. But I mean, obviously you have to think about your needs and your wants. Mm-hmm. So what your needs being a roof over your head. So your housing, your food, basic clothes to wear, things like that, like the things that you have to live your life. And then the wants are more of the nice to haves. And again, that's where thinking about your values and what's most important to you and what are my goals and where am I trying to go, and figuring out how you're going to make trade-offs. Because in most cases, money's a finite resource and there often isn't enough to satisfy all of our needs and all of our wants. Mm-hmm. And, or some things have to get pushed down the road a bit and you have to prioritize. So it's really important to know what's most important to you because it will help you make those decisions. So for example, if you value, let's say you have children and you value education, then saving for their post-secondary education might be a very important goal for you to have. And you want to make sure you're doing that every month. But you want to for sure have money for the fun stuff, mm-hmm. because we all know what it's like to live without that stuff, as we experienced when we were all locked down at the beginning. So it's not about like denying yourself the fun stuff that you enjoy doing. It's just about being clear about what you want and what's important to you and what your goals are, and then making the allocations accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. I know I hear a lot about these different rules for our money, like the 50-30-20 rule. So what general rules do you abide by when creating a budget or advising people who are about to create a budget?
Right. And you're right. There's rules of thumb. And some of these tools that I mentioned, I think you can see what the typical or average spending is in, that city or that part of the country. One of the big rules of thumb is about housing. So they say it should be approximately 30% of your net take-home pay on housing, I believe, net. And, another rule of thumb that you hear a lot is, try to save 10%. But, a lot of these things are just rules of thumb, especially on the saving side. Like if you can do more, mm-hmm. great. There's nothing to say, limit it to 10%. Other things you can find out, what typically people pay for insurance for similar circumstances and things like that. But, other things are really personal, like food, mm-hmm. It depends on your habits and your dietary restrictions and all kinds of other things. So I think those things are a little harder to get a rule of thumb on, but even things like utilities, you can often find out what people in I think I get notifications from our suppliers saying like if we're spending more than average or less than the average person in our neighborhood on, electricity or gas. So, some things are a little more objective and can be quantified that way. And other things are a little more subjective, like, what do you spend on a vacation? Like that really is so personal.
Yeah, of course. And like you said, I think it kind of really comes back down to what you value. If you're someone who really values, entertainment and being social and going out with your friends to eat, is probably advisable that you budget a little bit more towards those activities, but also realizing that there still is that trade-off, like you said.
Yeah, I think you just don't want to be surprised when you actually look at what you spend. Like I interviewed a young woman who was in her 20s who told me that it was really important to her to eat healthy and to eat well. So she budgeted extra to be able to do that, to buy organic food. And she also felt it was in line with her values to support local stores in her neighborhood. So even if they were a little more expensive, she built that into her budget. And the same with gift giving. Like she really loved giving thoughtful gifts to people. So that was a very conscious part of her budget. I think you just want to be mindful of your spending and be making choices that, where you're aware of why you did that, rather than kind of getting to the end of the month and being like, I don't know where my money went. Like where did it all go? That is not a good way to live, because you want to bring more awareness to your spending.
Absolutely. So in terms of bringing awareness to our spending, how important is goal setting when it comes to money management and reaching our financial milestones? Do you have any, tips or examples of how we can reach our financial goals? Do you recommend, splitting them into smaller goals? What advice do you have?
Well, again, it goes back to your values. So if you tie your goals back to your values, the things that are most important to you, then they're going to be more compelling and motivating for you to achieve those. And some people use little structures. Like, for example, if you were saving for a down payment on a house, some people would have like a picture of like their dream house, somewhere where they could see it. So if they were tempted to spend money on something else, then every time they saw that picture of their dream house, it would remind them that, that's what the ultimate goal was. That's what they were really saving for and what was really important to them. Setting goals helps delay gratification and teaches you to wait for rewards. And that is something that we want to teach our kids as well, because we do live in a world that stresses in instant gratification and consumption. And there's so much, so much advertising and media and FOMO and social media and social commerce, like it goes on and on. So it's really easy to get off track. And if you have these larger goals that are tied back to your values, I think it will help you stay on track. And then there's little things, like you said, you could break them down into component parts. So are you familiar with the SMART goals framework?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So, make your goals specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. So I get into that a little bit in the book too, because even kids, if they're saving for a trip or, more expensive video game or something like that they can use that framework too, because it just does help break it down into the steps. And as you're more specific, you can measure your progress towards achieving your goal.
Absolutely. So I did want to just quickly come back to this idea of values. I know a big topic of the past federal election was just in regards to affordability, especially in terms of housing. The demand is kind of exceeding the supply, which is causing home prices to go up, especially in certain areas, like Toronto, Vancouver, Victoria, I think as well. But what are your thoughts on renting versus buying? I know for someone like me, I kind of fall into this millennial category. So I'm still on the fence of whether or not it makes sense for me to buy versus rent. So I guess what are the benefits of both, and how do we decide what's best for us?
It's the hottest topic, I would say. Housing affordability in Canada is, especially, again, it's one of those things that boomed during COVID. Everyone wanted more space and more distance, and people could work remotely. So a lot of people started moving farther out of the city and started buying houses. Like, I feel like it's it's such a big topic of discussion. And like, I know Rob Carrick at the Globe and Mail writes a lot about this issue. And I just actually saw something on LinkedIn this morning that arguably renting is less expensive than owning. And I think with owning, sometimes people mistakenly think like, okay, instead of a rent payment, I'm making a mortgage payment. But there's a lot more costs involved with owning than just the cost of ownership, like your mortgage, because there's also maintenance and like ongoing maintenance, so just cutting the grass and mowing the lawn and fixing the roof and fixing anything that breaks, like appliances. You don't have those responsibilities for maintenance when you rent. If something breaks, you call your landlord, and hopefully they deal with it. My kids say they don't always come running, but you do have someone else that's responsible for that. But when you own, it's on you. And then there's like larger capital expenditures, to renovate and make sure the house is like up to date and electricity and the pipes and all that stuff. So I think you have more responsibility and more costs. When you rent, you have a lot of flexibility. You might be on a lease, but often that's just 1 year. And then I know in Toronto, it's very common that it goes month to month after that. So you have a flexibility if you're young and you're not sure where you're going to be working forever, or even what city or country you're going to be living in, then you can change. You have the opportunity to travel or to move or to change neighborhoods. Whereas I think when you own, I think the pro is that there's more stability when you own, because no one's going to, tell you have to move. That's another issue when you're a renter. Sometimes the owner tells you that, I think that, they can rent to family members or something and you have to leave. So there's always that risk. Whereas if you own, then you decide how long you want to stay there. You're also, when you own, you're living by your own rules. So, with regards to parties or noise, within reason, because you want to be considerate of your neighbors, but you don't have the same rules like no pets or no smoking, that you would have if you were a tenant. So there's that. I also feel like renting provides more flexibility in terms of affordability, because you can choose if you want to live with roommates or not to make it more affordable. Right. So especially if you're younger and, maybe you did that in university and you're used to having roommates and you want company and all that stuff. So like, it just makes living downtown in a big city, which could be expensive, a little more affordable. Whereas it's a little harder to do that with a house, I would think. To find roommates, like conventional roommates, I've heard of people doubling up, like two siblings buying a house together, or, even family friends buying a house together, but it's a little more complicated. Right? Lots can go wrong there. And then I guess, another pro of buying is the pride of ownership. It's your own house. A lot of people are really proud of the fact that they were able to afford a house and they work on their house and they do a lot of home improvements, sometimes themselves. And, that's a really good feeling. And it's also an opportunity to build wealth, which is, I think, the conventional reason behind home ownership, right? Which was pay down your mortgage, build equity, plus home values have generally gone up. So there really are pros and cons. Again, I think it goes back to your values. I feel like a broken record, but it does. Do you value security and stability, or adventure? And that can change at different stages of your life as well. And then, of course, it's just like, it is a numbers game right now. And there, as you mentioned, there's so much demand and the supply has not caught up and prices are really stratospheric, and affordability is a real issue.
Absolutely. I just want to quickly talk about, you had mentioned, obviously, one of the big pros of home ownership is the opportunity to build wealth. So for those who might not necessarily be interested in owning a home and maybe they're renting and they're saving a little bit on that end, do you recommend that they reinvest that portion of their potential savings so that they can build wealth in a different way?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another argument people have for renting, is that it's not, buying a house isn't the only way to build wealth. So as you said, the money that they are not using on a house, they can use to build an investment portfolio. So, and the markets have been also extremely strong. So there's other ways to build wealth. It could be, you could be investing in your own business. You could be buying stocks and bonds and other securities. There's lots of other ways to build wealth besides a home. And in fact, some people would argue that your home is in some ways a consumption asset because it's hard to monetize and liquidate unless you sell it one day.
That's a very interesting perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
because it would be hard to sell because you wouldn't just be able to turn around right away and sell it. It would take time.
Exactly. It's not as liquid because it does take, typically 30 days, I think is the average, or maybe it was in Toronto at one point. Maybe it's longer now or shorter now. But yeah, it's not like selling a stock or a bond where it's usually T+2 or 3. So it is less liquid. It is something like you have to plan for ultimately, like, are you going to sell your house? How are you going to get the wealth you've built up in your house out one day? And in fact, I think right now I'm noticing that a lot of baby boomers are taking advantage of this hot housing market, and they are selling their big houses that, maybe they're no longer using all of their house. Their kids have grown up and left, and they are taking advantage of this market right now. And some are just going into rentals. So that's another stage of your life where you may decide, it makes more sense now to rent, let someone else deal with the headaches of maintenance and all that stuff. And, you can take the money that you get from your house and, as you say, invest it in something else that can continue to build wealth, or maybe you're going to live on it or what have you. But yeah, absolutely. Buying a house isn't the only way to do that. And I think we've just been, it was, that thing, like the American dream, the Canadian dream of home ownership. But I think we are starting to look at things differently now.
Yes, definitely. COVID has taken us all for a loop.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess one final comment, I know you talked a little bit about it in episode 1 where we were discussing financial literacy for children. But obviously due to COVID, we've become a very cashless society. Do you have any resources or apps that you recommend to track spending? I know you talked about like our banks. We usually have I know with TD, I have a MySpend and those kinds of things. But are there any apps, external apps that you could recommend or resources?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in episode 1, I would suggest for most people, the first place, the easiest place to start is through your own mobile banking app, because it's built right in there. There's into your mobile banking, there's a tracking tool and a budgeting tool and all these other things you can use, such as setting alerts and notifications to indicate, to remind you that you've spent money. So, but, the other app that started it all that I used to use way back before the banks had these built-in tools was Mint. So Mint is owned by Intuit, which creates TurboTax and QuickBooks and all that stuff. So this is their personal finance app, and it's mint.intuit.com/Canada. Make sure you go to the Canadian site. So that app is really good. It's very robust. It has a lot more functionality and reporting and details and granularity than the banking apps and most of the banking apps. I find they're a little more high level, and Mint lets you really get very detailed in terms of what you're tracking and how you're budgeting. It also pulls data from all different sources. Mint, like it will scrape if you have accounts with different banks, for example, Mint will pull them all in. Whereas you mentioned TD MySpend, that's only going to use your TD accounts.
Yes.
Right. So it may not, depending on your situation, it may not give you the complete picture. But something like Mint will. So, do your homework, look into it, see what appears to be the best fit for you. Depends how you feel about, like a third-party app like Mint, kind of scraping those sources of information. If you want a really complete detailed picture, or if you're happy with just like kind of having a general idea, like I find the TD app that does a really good job of separating needs and wants, and it gives you a pretty good high level view of what you're spending in some major categories. It doesn't break them down into as much granular detail as I was used to seeing in Mint, but you can still get a very good feel for like, okay, what am I spending on groceries this month? What am I spending on education? Like, there's a whole bunch of preset categories.
That's fantastic. So to our listeners, take a look at Mint, see if it works for you.
Yeah, right. And start with your bank too, because I feel like for a lot of people that might do the job.
Awesome. So I guess if you could leave, our listeners or even just to the non-budgeters with one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't be afraid to look at your budget. I think a lot of people have their head in the sand and they kind of don't want to know. And it's gotten to the point where they really don't know where their money's going. But if you got to know where you're starting from, if you want to be able to plan and set goals and, have the things in life that you want to have and do the things in life that you want to do. So I would say just get started, treat yourself to something great after you've done it. Like just set aside a little bit of time to start working on your budget and then reward yourself with, something that you enjoy once you've, as your little treat for having done it. But don't be afraid to look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. And I think most people will feel a sense of relief once they've had a chance to look at the numbers and really understand where they stand. And if you do find that you can't balance your budget, that you can't figure out how to cut back, or there's lots of resources out there that can help you. There are, money coaches, people that certify financial planners that will help you get your budget together. If you are having issues with debt management, there's nonprofit credit counseling that you can seek out. So there's different ways to, just try and get started. And then once you do, if you find you need more help, there's definitely resources out there that can help you.
That's great. So for our listeners who, want to learn more, who want to read your book, where can they purchase The Wisest Investment?
Right. So thank you for that. If you go to my website, thewisestinvestment.com, you will see a link to purchase the book there. And it's available as a physical copy, as a physical book, as well as an ebook through Amazon. And, we talked a bunch today, Nikkei, about values. And if you're interested in discovering what your values are, I have another website, which is robintaub.com. So Robin with an I, ROBINTAUB.com. And there, people can get an exercise that I created in the book called the Values Validator to help figure out what your top 5 values are, as we've discussed. And you can do that and determine how those values can help guide and prioritize your financial decisions and help you set goals. And you can get your partner to do it and see, where you overlap and get your kids to do it too. So that's on robintaub.com. And there's also links on that website too to purchase the book. So I hope you'll visit the website and check out some of the resources I've got on there.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure that we include it in the show notes of the episode.
Oh, thank you. That would be great.
Well, thank you, Robin, so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us for a very critical conversation.
I enjoyed it too. And I hope everyone's encouraged during Financial Literacy Month to, whether, it's teaching their kids about money or whether it's getting their own financial house in order. I hope this will help encourage you to do that.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Thanks, Nikkei. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. This episode featured Robin Taub CPA CA, professional speaker and author of The Wisest Investment, teaching your kids to be responsible, independent, and money smart for life. Don't forget to subscribe to the Straight from the CPA's Mouth mailing list for exclusive content. As always, if you like what you're hearing, have ideas for future episodes, or have any feedback you'd like to share, email us at knowledgecenter@cpaalberta.ca or leave us a comment on social media. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Straight from the CPA's Mouth is produced by the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the CPA profession in Alberta. This podcast is made possible by Brian Heshey, FCPA FCA. Thanks to Brian's generous donation, the foundation created the Heshey CPA Knowledge Center, a virtual hub of resources for all Albertans. Find out more about the Foundation and the Knowledge Centre at cpaalberta.ca/foundation.